cut out. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm sorry. Must be my reception's bad.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, I do have you now. Yep.
Okay. I just moved to a different location here, so maybe it'll be a little bit clearer.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, I've used the SP90 product in the past. I was putting it down at about 4.8 ounces per acre, and through my sprayer, obviously, I really liked it. I was using the SCP product and liked it. It's the mixing is a little bit of a pain in the neck. Not that it's all that difficult, but with everything I put in the tank, I was just thinking. I said was considering the LC10 plus 7 product instead of the SP90. Are they comparable at all?
Well, they're very comparable in the sense that they both have humic and fulvic acids in them, and they're very comparable in the sense that they are both soluble humate products. They are not exactly the same in that the SP90 is what we loosely refer to here as a straight humate product, where the LC10 plus 7 is what we refer to here as a micronutrient chelate humate.
Okay.
So the plus 7 are the 7 micronutrients.
Right.
Now, what's really critical to understand is by design, these micronutrient levels are not high. So they're not going to change any of your micronutrient levels in your soil. They're barely going to move the needle at all, even in a tissue sample after using it for a year. So, I mean, you're of course cutting your grass and all that, but the point is it's not meant to be a micronutrient supplement. That's not the point of this product. Not in the tissue or soil test sense of the word. It's not to be supplemental to improve micronutrient levels. It is meant to be supplemental in that it is super highly efficient in terms of its ability to supplement micronutrition, but not necessarily on detectable levels, but necessarily to the levels where the plant responds, which is quite interesting.
Right.
So the reason I go into all of this is you said, are they basically the same? They are, but they aren't. So think of it this way. Think of it as SP90 is a bigger sponge with more nutrient holding capacity, and think of the LC10 plus 7 as an equal sponge but with less nutrient holding capacity because it's already holding 7 micronutrients.
Okay.
The sponge is already somewhat filled, if you will.
All right.
Now to kind of that might be like a quasi negative, if you will, but here's the interesting thing about it. If you have disease pressure, you will find that while straight humate like SP90 or LC12, those two products are very similar, except one's a concentrate and one's a soluble powder. Those straight humate products will help with disease resistance, but the LC10 plus 7 or the FAO plus 7 actually help with disease resistance even more. And we did not necessarily design the product that way in the beginning, but we found out that our formulation does that by default, and we did not know that. So it was kind of one of those things that you're like, oh yeah, cool, that's nice. It was an added bonus, if you will. But so when you think of those minor packages, think of them as products that will do what humates are touted to do out in the marketplace, but it actually does more because they're actually helping with disease resistance.
Okay, that's interesting. That's good. It's kind of right up my alley there. All right, it's the ST90. I thought I was putting out at I think 4.8 ounces per acre. And on the label it says if you're happy with any pesticide, they go to 1 ounces per 50 gallons. Why is that? That change? I mean, why is that on the label? Should I not be going to the heavier rate if I'm putting pesticides and stuff in the tank?
Well, okay, so I'm gonna the humic acid molecules don't just work in one direction. Okay, humic and fulvic acid molecules. People kind of see soluble humate and soluble fulvate products as being kind of linear. Like it's just an assumption. They don't actually think of it that way, but it's just a in the back of your head assumption that they're linear products in that they kind of do this set of things in this direction, and then that's just it. That's it. That's the end of the story. It's actually not the case. We've found that when you use much higher rates, you can actually have the ability. It's almost like you can overwhelm the pesticide and tie it up if you use too much.
Okay.
Where if you use very almost minuscule rates, you can enhance the systemic nature of a given pesticide. So notice I grabbed a hold of the phrase systemic nature. So if I'm using, I'll give you an example. Here's a great example. We call it the paradoxical effect. So way back in the early days, this was a lot of years ago now, when we were manufacturing humates, there was a lawn care company near Philly. I can't remember the name of the company, but they had a smiley face for their logo. But anyway, Happy Lawns or something silly like that. But one of the technicians had spoken with me about this quote unquote paradoxical effect, but all he remembered is that it on one hand it does one thing and on the other hand it does something else. Anyway, he went out spraying weeds, right? 2,4-D, etc. And he was on somebody's property. It was toward the very end of his day, like 3:30 or whatever in the afternoon. And he sprayed the weed control and he was flicking his wrist into the landscape beds, kind of not really into them, but the perennial flowers were kind of bowing out into the lawn. And you've seen that before on people's lawns, okay. So he was inadvertently hitting these perennials. Well, lo and behold, of course, he wasn't thinking a whole lot about it. He was just doing his thing. And the phone rings back at the office, 5 o'clock. Customers all teed off and worried she's going to lose all of her perennials. And he calls and he says, look, I got to go handle this tonight. If there's anything that I can do. And I said, crank up the humic rate, and just apply a heavy dose of humates. And he's like, why? And I'm like, well, it's going to stain the plants, but it'll help to lock up the active ingredient 2,4-D that's causing this problem. It doesn't actually lock it up. It disassociates part of the molecular makeup, which of course once you disassociate it, it can't do what it was doing as it was an associated product. It was all together. So you kind of separate the arms from the legs and then it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Long story short, it worked. He reversed the corkscrewing of all of these plants. Then they got back to living just as they had not been even sprayed. By the next morning, I might add. So, you have to be careful because at the lower rates, you enhance the systemic nature. At the higher rates, you tend to reverse it.
Okay. All right. So then potentially, wasn't getting the rate that I was going at, then I was potentially not getting the full efficacy out of my fungicide. Although that's not what I saw. They seemed to get better. I seemed to do okay. I didn't have as much disease pressure last year.
But
then again, it's hard to say because it was a low disease year.
But remember something, okay, Trevor? Fungi, right? Whether they're beneficial or they're pathogenic, fungi have to assimilate food. They don't eat like you and me with a mouth part, but they have to assimilate food substrates in order to survive, okay? So they do not prefer at all assimilating the very large, very complex humic and fulvic acid molecules. So if you are essentially coating your plants with a residue, if you will, of large humic and fulvic acid molecules, you are basically setting the proverbial buffet table with broccoli that the kids don't like.
That's an interesting analogy. I like that.
Okay, so when you, but I mean, when you put out all the stuff that pathogens like to assimilate, like high nitrates, it's like setting that buffet table with candy, cake, and ice cream, and cookies. Okay. So you have to ask yourself. You asked a really good question, and I'm really glad that we've gone down this path because not too many people actually ask the question you ask. And what it illuminated was there's actually you want to think about these molecules that people are just loosely calling humate, okay? They're far more complex than that, and they don't just have this linear way of life. These molecules do a lot of different things, and once you start understanding that they're kind of like a Leatherman tool, you know what a Leatherman tool is on your belt, yes?
Right.
Okay, yeah. They're kind of like that. But you just have to understand it enough to know how if you use it in a slightly different fashion, it may give you a very different result. You see? And so you're starting to understand that, which is great because that just simply means you're going to get more bang for your buck out of your product. That's all that means. But the real key is to remember this. Beneficial fungi love the very large, complex nature of humic and fulvic acids. Hence, the reason that you will always find soluble humate products and or raw humic or blended with supplements that are intended to grow some sort of beneficial fungi. As an example, only mycorrhizae. So on your course, you might be interested in growing out endomycorrhizae to support the turf on your greens and tees and fairways. If that's the case, the little bit less and the little bit less and the little bit less each year of fungicide that you have to use, the little bit more, and the little bit more beneficial fungi can start to rebound. In the case of this conversation, mycorrhizae as example. So think about it this way. This is really cool because on one hand, yes, you might be using some humate to improve the systemic nature of your fungicide. And if that's the case, you really should be using a lower rate of said active ingredient, and you should be extending your intervals between your sprays, because I'm going to put money on it says that that amount of humate that you mixed into that fungicide tank mix is going to reduce the amount of active ingredient you have to use to get the same result as you used to have to use before, the same result you used to get before with a higher rate. and you're going to be able to extend your intervals and still get the same efficacy as you were getting before at shorter intervals of spray. I'll bet you money on it. And then what's really fascinating about that is you start the momentum moving in a different direction, because when you were using the fungicide before, you were having to use it a little more frequently, and part of the reason is you're knocking back your beneficials slowly over time. But in the case of when you start working with your humic and fulvic compounds, you start making that fungicide more effective with less active ingredient. Simultaneously, you are providing a beneficial fungal food substrate, but also a food substrate that is not beneficial for the pathogens to assimilate. So you're starving the pathogens out. So you're having a direct effect on them with the fungicide. But then using the humic materials and the fulvic materials, you're starving the fungal, the pathogenic populations out a little bit more each time you use these materials. And you're feeding your beneficial fungal populations even a little bit more. And so what happens is, while we're doing our jobs over a course of 1 to 3 years, on your course, what's actually happening is the scales are starting to tilt into your favor. And you're starting to reduce your pathogen populations while gradually and quietly increasing your beneficial fungal populations. Now, over that same period, you're seeing a slow but sure reduction in fungicides. You also start to see that your nitrogen is going a little bit further, and you start to see all these different beneficial things starting to play out, and you scratch your head and you say, I wonder why. And what happened was, you had a whole line of dominoes lined up, and you took the very first one and you hit it. And when you hit it, that whole row of dominoes started to go down. And when it went down, they started to go down in your favor, because the domino you hit first was one that was the right move this time. And it was actually putting things in motion in the right direction, as opposed to maybe the wrong direction, where you're suppressing the beneficial biology in the soil. Inadvertently, not intentionally, of course, but a lot of our practices of the past 30 and 40 years, we inadvertently were kind of suppressing our beneficial biological balances. So our dominoes were going in the wrong direction. Now our dominoes start to go in the right direction, and you start getting this accumulated momentum the way you want it.
Interesting. That's good. That's obviously the direction I want to go.
Yeah, me too.
That's super. I really appreciate that. That really explained a lot as to why this stuff works. And I did it. The SP90. I definitely saw some. I got was longer between spray intervals on my fairways, and it was. I had better. I had just better everything this past year. It was a good growing season, but I think there was a lot more to it than just that. Next question. Your calcium product, or calcium, if I was to put that down on greens at aerification time this spring, would I be able to cut back on my rates on the SP90 or the LC10+7 a little bit during the year, or is that just a separate?
I see.
Or would you not do that?
Yeah, I see that as a separate application for a separate reason. So I'm going to answer your question with actually two answers, because it deserves those two answers. But I want to ask you a question before I go any further, because I'm not in good practice here. We've begun this thing where we start to record calls, and I should have said that to you up front, because but I'm doing it for actual educational purposes, no other reason. In other words, when I did it kind of subconsciously, but I think you had already said the course name and whatnot that you were from, and so that's not actually in this call right now. It's only the person's name and my name and the content of the discussion. That's it. But it could be posted, is what I'm saying. So if you don't want me to post it as an educational opportunity for other people dealing with the same types of questions or challenges, then I'll just delete it when we're done. So just tell me that whenever you feel comfortable telling me whatever you want to tell me. Okay.
Yeah, I got no problem with whatever you record here.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't. Yeah, no, I know, but it
Oh,
didn't even catch the course, I don't think. But nonetheless, let's take your two forks, okay? So, when you sit down, and this is a common analogy that I use, but when you sit down on Thanksgiving Day and you sit down for your first meal, now I don't know, you sound like a not as old as I am, so you sound younger, which means you might have two places you go for Thanksgiving at least. And so if you do, all right, you're either having to measure yourself each place you go, or by the end of the day, you're basically uncomfortable. And there's no way that your body is able to assimilate all of the nutrition that you actually ingested that day. But if we took that day's worth of food and we spread it out over a week in small little bird-sized amounts, you would actually assimilate more of the nutrition from that food, because it's usually pretty good food. You would assimilate more of the nutrition better than even on an average day, because you put it into these bird-sized quantities, meals. So, so what you need to understand about humate and seaweed is, by and large, you're going to get foliar uptake and you're going to get foliar attributes from these products, but the plants can only assimilate so much at one time. And this is one of the significant mistakes that other companies are making when they promote products of this nature. They're saying put X amount down 3 times a year or 4 times a year. Listen, you really want to spoon feed this stuff down, because you will save money. That's a pretty valuable piece of information to any crop manager. I don't care if it's golf course turf or corn and soybean, grain crops, whatever it is. You will manage your money much more intelligently by putting small amounts of your active ingredients down and putting them down frequently. Okay, because the plants just make such a better use of that material. Now, that said, that would be my reasoning for saying to you, I don't like the idea of reducing those numbers of applications. I'd rather see you keep the frequency up and reduce the concentration of each application if that's what's necessary, so you do not exceed your annual per acre application rate. Okay? And
I guess that's more what I was getting at. I guess I wasn't looking to reduce the number of applications so much as the amount of product per application.
So when you spray, how many gallons per acre do you spray?
I've got 36 holes, so I go on fairways. I'm going out about 20 to 22 gallons per acre.
Okay, so I mean 20 to 22 gallons per acre. Let's just take 22 divided by 43.5 thousand square feet per acre. You're putting down about a half gallon of water per 1,000 square feet. Okay.
Right.
Now, maybe a little bit in your greens because of the cut height, but as you start to get to slightly higher cut heights, that half gallon, there's no real soil application going on. This is just tissue. This is just a foliar application. Okay?
Right.
And when you add up the low amounts of product that you're using in the course of a year, it's hardly anything. See, when you take that amount, let's say you say I'm going to use 4 gallons of liquid seaweed concentrate in per acre over the course of a year. And so you take that 4 gallons and you take it times 128 ounces per gallon. You've got 512 ounces of liquid seaweed concentrate that you're going to apply per acre per year. Now, let's say you're going to do that. I'm just picking numbers right now, so don't latch on to anything too hard. Let's say you're going to do that over 18 applications. So you're going to put out about 28.44 ounces of liquid seaweed concentrate per acre per each of 18 annual foliar applications. At the end of the year, you still only applied 4 gallons of liquid seaweed concentrate. So we're not talking a lot of pounds. We're not even talking 4 pounds of seaweed extract. So if you turn around with a granular material that has some seaweed extract in it, it's just going to add to that effect. But unless someone's putting a boatload of seaweed extract into a product, which is not typically the case in a granular material because it's just too expensive, you can't put too much in a granular material, not of a soluble seaweed extract. So you're not going to anywhere be excessive if you were to run gypsum or lime or something that had that mixed in. You just won't be excessive. Not only that, but when you make that dry application of that material and then you irrigate, that's going to go down into the soil, where your foliar applications, the only way they're going to reach the soil is over time. After you've done your cutting, the cuttings and the clippings will maybe accumulate a little bit. But by that time, just so you know, microbes have also begun to biodegrade those materials. You see, because they're biodegrading on the leaf tissue before they ever go down. So so you're not overdoing it at all. I mean, I really do appreciate the thought process, but you're not overdoing it. Now, and the original question, ironically, that you asked was, would you or could you reduce something later? I would suggest to you that your foliars right now, again, only talking from a budget standpoint right this minute, the first and foremost thing that we need to do when we move to organic and biological materials, in my personal opinion, is we need to make sure that you are doing things in an economically viable manner, because they need to meet your budget and of those above you who are looking over your shoulder. We need to make sure that they're all economically happy and that it meets your aesthetic satisfaction. Now, if there's still money left in the budget, now you can talk to the board and you can say, hey, there's money in the budget. We've got some great results going on here. We've really learned how to manage our cost well, manage the course well, but I don't have enough fungal biomass in my soil, beneficial fungal biomass, and I'd really like to do something to enhance that. I'd like to peel off X amount of the budget, and I'd like to make an application as follows, or 2 or 3 this year as follows. Are you adverse to that? No, go ahead. Everything looks great. Thank you very much for your hard work. Go for it. So now what our job is to do is to give you products that actually, A, work, and you got good direction on how they can work well. B, they can save you money. Now, if they work and they save you money and they reduce the amount of synthetic materials that are required in an otherwise conventional course to just kind of maintain, now we've opened up the budget, we're getting good results. Now we can really start addressing some of the underlying causes of what would have maybe been some of the problems or root causes before. See, because when we're going after things with the fungicide, all we're doing is we're masking it, we're suppressing it, we're beating it back, we're beating it back, we're beating it back. But the underlying cause is still there. What's really nice about this program that you're contemplating and that you're slowly enacting possibly, what's really nice about this is it starts to slowly put you back in the driver's seat, where you can not only get the results you want and have some really nice looking turf and some happy people that you work for and with, but you can also turn around and say, you know what, there's a little left in the budget. I might actually be able to start to address the root cause of some of these issues. And those root causes, in the end, by and large, will come back to, and this is key, they will come back to every single ingredient that you put in a hopper and every single ingredient that you put into a spray tank feeds one type of biology or another, or one group or another. And the key thing, Trevor, the key thing for you to remember is that it's just like setting that picnic table or that buffet table. If you pile that table up with junk food, you can almost predict who's going to be at that table. If you know what I mean? And so the same applies for your course. Every single time you put something in the tank, you are absolutely, definitively selecting for some type of biology to move in and to break that down, because that is the way nature works. Nature moves in to break down biofilms and to break down substances, and it's just the way it works. Throw a fish on the ground after a cookout, and what happens? In 2 days, there's nothing left but bones and a little bit of cartilage. There's nothing left. You don't even see the biology on it. It just melted it away. And so this is happening every single time you put something in your tank. Even non-selective herbicides, which brand names I won't mention, but you know what I'm talking about. There are bacteria who live to break down the active ingredient in that well-known non-selective herbicide. They live to break it down. The problem is that bacterial population expands at the expense of beneficial fungal populations. So now your beneficial fungal populations start declining sharply. And when you use that non-selective herbicide, as an example, underneath grapevines, where you want to produce fruit so that you can produce wine, the grapevines don't mature because you don't have the fungal biomass and the yeast cultures beneath the grapevines, because you were using this popular non-selective herbicide, which was exploding the bacterial counts and not allowing the beneficial fungal counts to explode or to grow at all. In fact, they started to decline, and now you were waiting 17 years to mature a vine to the point where you could harvest the grapes for wine. It affects entire industries. So back to everything you put in your tank and everything you put in your hopper is setting the table. Your course, your golf course, is a proverbial buffet table. Whom are you going to invite to that buffet table? That's the question. And so every single time you put something in that tank or that hopper, talk to somebody, call somebody, ask them, is this going to help me build fungal, or is this going to help me build bacterial? Is this going to help my protozoa counts? What are we doing here? And as you start to do that, you can't assimilate all that knowledge in one call. You can't assimilate it in a year's time. But there are people that we've worked with for 16 and 18 years in the golf industry, which maybe according to some people isn't that long, but for us, that's a long time. And they're all still customers today, by the way. So they like what they're seeing, and they've been learning this for all those years. And so now they see their course as a living, breathing entity or organism. And they know that everything that they do has an action and a reaction. And so that's kind of where you're at, really. and your knowledge is just going to start exploding at this point because
Yeah.
and it's fun. So
Yeah, I'll tell you what. The first time we talked, like I said, it was probably 3, 4, or 5 years ago. My head was swimming after our conversation. I couldn't soak it all in.
Yeah.
And now after studying all this and using it for a little while and talking to people, and our conversation makes a lot more sense right now.
yeah, isn't that that's something? Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm the same way. Believe me, I learn from everyone that I talk with. I learn something here and there, everywhere. It might be specifically about your industry or something that golf course supers do, or in the case of a tomato grower, something about that, or cows and somatic cell count in cows, and all sorts of what cows eat and how that affects their overall health, or remediation of oil spills. Like, it's fascinating. And what's really cool, Trevor, is that I might learn something about growing tomatoes that I can then turn around and share with the golf course superintendent, because the principle at its core is exactly the same. It's amazing. And so, by the way, some of what I've shared with you today came from other industries in which I had to learn something. So that's why I like doing what we do here, because we get to help people connect and concepts to connect.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I have one more question for you. I've never treated, like, almost all my gardens at the golf course are all perennials.
Yep.
I've got away with almost all my annuals just to make it cheaper and easier over time.
Okay.
If do you have one product that, I don't spend a lot of my budget on these things, but would there be one product you would recommend that would, that could help those things?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. There's a product called Influence, and in the next couple of years, you're just going to hear more and more of that with regard to the turf blogs, because Influence is a cocktail mix product. It's got a lot of great stuff. I mean, just on the surface of what it has in there, it's got your micros, your chelates, your fulvics, your humics, your seaweed extracts, your yucca extracts. It's got all sorts of good stuff in there, and it's very well balanced product. It's not over the top, and it's not too light. Used at a very conservative rate is going to give you great results. Now, what isn't Influence? It is not an NPK product. Used by itself, I think you'll probably be quite happy with what you see. If you throw 1 gallon of if the fish isn't a problem around the clubhouse because of smell, then use the fish. If a hydrolyzed fish, but you don't need much, okay? Because you really, contrary to common thought of the past, you do not need the kind of NPK that we were once taught. That's just it's a misnomer. I don't care what anyone says. If your biological program is done right, you do not need all that NPK. So the other thing is if the smell is an issue, you can buy, we have a 201, which I think this year will probably be a 301. And then we also have a 503. And they're actually a non-odoriferous NPK product, almost strictly NPK. So it's kind of like, use the Influence if you want everything but the NPK. Use the NPK if you want just NPK. And then if you want like the Influence package with just a tracer of NPK, then get the 503, add a little of that in, use into the Influence tank mix, and go. That's it.
Okay.
It's that simple.
Is that a foliar feed, or is that
it's going to be full. It's both. You can literally, like, if you have a gun, like say you have a JD9 gun that you put on the end of a hose, and you've got a little hydraulic sprayer or whatever you've got, you just go around and you can do foliar feed. I don't like the word feed, but that's a different subject for a different time. But you can foliar apply, or you can soil drench. Now, I'll point out this. These are outstanding materials. One of the natural drawbacks of them is they are dark in color. So if you are spraying, I'm just trying to think of let's say it's white Shasta daisies, okay? And they have those nice white petals. It's the middle of summer, and you go through and you do a foliar application. Guess what? You're going to have brown spots on your white petals, okay? All you do is around the base of those plants, because the Shasta daisies are usually up on top. Just take that JD9, crank it down a little bit so you don't have all this major billowing pressure, and just put your gallonage down at the base of that plant. It may only be a half a gallon or whatever, or quarter, not even a pint. But trust me, it will be taken up by the roots. The biology in the rhizosphere will munch on it for biological food substrate purposes, and you will get outstanding benefits from it. Absolutely. You just know that it can stain if you're whimsically spraying something that wants to absorb a dark color.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I've got a new gardener coming in this year. She's got a lot of experience. I know she likes using, she likes to stay away from any synthetic stuff.
She'll love.
I've never put on anyhow, but it'd be nice to start, boosting our gardens a little bit.
She'll love Influence. It can handle all of the ornamentals. I'm an arborist. I treat plants all the time. I totally get it. She'll love this product.
Okay, super. Good.
Okay.
That's absolutely super. Yeah. Eric, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I enjoyed our conversation.
Yep.
That's great. I may call you back at some time with questions on some of your other products. But thank you so much for your time today and getting back to me.
So if you want to review this conversation, Trevor, I don't know exactly when it's going to go up, but since you've said it's okay in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, or whenever our marketing guy gets it up, it's going to be up. And it won't be necessarily at organicapproach.com. It could be at our new domain name, which is plantsoilhealth.com. plantsoilhealth.com. We don't want, it's going to be a strict educational site. Plant Soil Health is going to be a strict educational site. We really just didn't want to mix the e-commerce with the educational stuff. We wanted to keep the educational stuff separate. If you want to devour that, that's where it'll be. If you want to go buy something, you can go to the commerce site. And so we're just trying to keep things separate. Okay.
That's great. I don't know if you wanted to use the golf course name. If you wanted to, it's Chautauqua Golf Club.
Okay. I appreciate that.
If you'd like.
You just used it for me, so thank you.
Yeah, I assumed after I said, I probably did.
Yeah, but I mean, in the beginning, I actually, for whatever reason, I just didn't have that in there. You had mentioned it, but it just wasn't caught. So, but I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Trevor. All right, bud.
Yeah, no problem.
You got questions? Yeah, you got questions, you call back. If I'm not here, there's another Eric here. There are 2 Erics, and the other Eric is outstanding as well. He's been with me 30 years now, so he can handle the questions, I assure you. Okay?
Okay. What's his last name?
It sounds like the girl's name Denise, but it's spelled DANESE. DANESE. Okay?
Okay.
All right, man. Listen, good luck to you this year. I hope you have a great year. All right?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Same to you.
Thank you for your time. Take care now.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.